Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today we're going to be talking about the breed Frillbacks with Lance Newman. Lance got his first pair in 1998. He is the current president of the American Frillback Club, and he just received his Master Breeder Award for the breed. So we're going to learn all about Frillbacks today. Thanks for coming on and talking with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
What is your own origin with this breed, and how did you get started back in 1998 with them?
They were my very first pair of pigeons that I ever had. Growing up, my dad always raised cage birds and had fancy parrots and parakeets and finch and all that kind of stuff my entire life. So I grew up around birds, kind of got started. My sister's kindergarten teacher, they did a field trip to her family farm. Her father was Charlie Armstrong, and that is the father of Jim Armstrong, who many people know in the frillback or in the pigeon world. But Charlie, Jim's dad, invited me to, or found out that from my sister, found out that I had birds, and my dad and I had birds. And so Charlie said, well, you should tell your brother about the pigeons and stuff at their farm and have him come and visit sometime. So they did. And a few weeks later, I went out and visited the Armstrong farm, and he had frillbacks and racing homers. I saw the frillbacks and I was hooked. And he sent me home with a pair of blue grizzles, and that was in 1998. Then I started showing them in 1999, and other than a few years when I was in college and not really settled anywhere, I have always had them.
Wow, so you've been Frillbacks right from the start. How about that?
Yeah, they were the original breed, and I've had a few, other breeds on and off, and have a couple others that I play around with at my farm. But Frillbacks have always been the primary.
They stand out. They're a really unique breed. They got them real curly feathers.
Absolutely.
What can you tell us about the history of that? Was there different crosses between different breeds?
So the exact origin is really sort of unknown. We estimate that they are from somewhere in Asia Minor. So that's kind of where we speculate their origins are from. There is evidence that shows that Charles Darwin actually had frillbacks and had some of those in his collection of pigeons. Going back to kind of then, they were a much different breed. When you see a lot of older photos of frillbacks, you really see a bird that just kind of has a little hook coming up in the feathers, just kind of a little lifted feather in the wing. And so throughout history of the breed, and just continually breeding birds that had better and better curl, that kind of got us to where we are now. As far as the origins of what they are crossed, I'm not 100% sure. They are, considered a field pigeon or a structure pigeon. So they kind of fall in that family of pigeons.
It seemed like Darwin with his pigeons, he did go for the kind of extreme ones.
Right.
So, the whole idea of selective breeding. So, yeah, that makes
Right.
sense. It started with a little bit of a hook, and, now we have what we have today.
Exactly.
That's awesome. What's this breed's temperament like?
They are wild. They are not tame birds. And that is one thing people have to understand when they get into the breed. They very rarely are going to be your pet or want you to handle them or catch them. So they are a pretty flighty breed. They fly quite well, actually. A lot of people think that because of, the curls on the wings, that it might weigh them down, but actually they are very good flyers. And I have known quite a few breeders to actually fly them. But yes, they are not, even in the show cage, after you've trained them for months and handled them for months, they are still going to go crazy for the most part when you reach in to take them out.
A lot of cage training then to get those things
Yes.
ready for the show.
Right.
I never would have guessed that they actually flew, though. I just imagine that's so much drag on their wings.
No, they fly very well, and they can go straight to the top of a tree if they get out.
What's their housing like? I mean, do you have to do anything special for their lofts? Maybe keep it all wood, no cages?
When you're conditioning them to show, you definitely want to, obviously they have to be trained in a show cage. So there is going to be some of that wire contact. But as far as what has worked the best for me, and I have done a variety of methods on trying to raise them over the years, but I find an open loft works the best for me and not individual breeding cages. I have tried both, tend to have better luck when I leave them in open lofts. I have individual sections of my loft for each color. So each color is kept separate so that they do not cross. I tend to pull and pair, I'll put my pairs together, and I have smaller cages that I pair them off in, but once they're bonded, I put them back in the open loft.
That's a good way to still do open loft, but still have control, so it's not just a free for all. Also,
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the most important things with Frillbacks is you're constantly pairing for certain characteristics and certain things on one bird. You are trying to pair with another to get a combination, and that it's that way with any breed, but specifically for Frillbacks, it is important to pair certain traits together.
you have one open loft section, and then you walk through a door to another one. Is that how you do it?
So for me, I have two 25 by 40-foot lofts. One of them is sectioned off with breeder cages, but then has a large open area as well. And so that's kind of, I tend to use that for my conditioning for young birds. So once they are weaned, I take them and put them in the one big open loft to finish out for, season. Now, my second loft is divided into 5 sections, and it's a walk-in. Each one is a walk-in. I can't remember how the actual dimensions that I divided it up, but they are all 5 equal, sections. And I try to keep about 6 pair per color to breed from every year.
What colors are you currently breeding right now?
I work with red, yellow, and blue grizzle. Then I have black. I have whites in both crested and plain head. And those are currently the only colors that I have.
So they do have a pretty wide variety of the different patterns and colors that can come on there, and like you even mentioned too, the crested and uncrested.
Yes, yeah. So pattern wise, so the Frillbacks are very strict on color. We adopted the German standards quite a few years back. They have a heavy focus on color and it only being the allotted color classes. So that means that we no longer have an AOC or rare color class that we formerly did when we followed the American standard. So that limits you on coloration. And the German colors are all the grizzles, which are blue, red, yellow, and they also accept silver grizzle, which I currently don't have. We also have recessive red and recessive yellow. We have white sides in red and yellow. In crested, primarily you only see, or have for years, have only seen white crested birds in shows. There are a few folks that are working on putting the crests back into some of the other colors. In fact, there were some black crested shown by Daryl Martin this year at the Grand National in Oklahoma, and they're coming along. So that's exciting that we're getting some more crests back in the other colors. But again, that's black, white, and then also we do accept shield marks as well. So, or saddles, American term. Those are the accepted colors.
Speaking about showing the bird, can you walk us through some of the different methods you do for conditioning a bird for show? Obviously, training in the cage takes place long before the show.
So really, as far as show maintenance, they're not extremely high maintenance when it comes to getting them ready for a show. Naturally, you want to make sure their flights and tail feathers are clean, and then their muffs, you want to make sure feet and muffs are clean. As far as the frill itself, there's really not a ton that you can do to it. You can take the time because, and especially if you have a bird that has a heavier or a more dense curl, some of those curls will kind of wrap around each other. And so you'll see us in the showroom kind of with either like a pick, like a hair pick that we've cut most of the spikes out of, and we might have, 2 or 3 on there. And you'll see us kind of working and trying to separate some feathers and fluff them up a little bit, make sure there's not any feather or frills that have kind of gone under on the backside of the wing shield. And other than that, there's really not that much prep to them. It's funny, I've been asked multiple times like how small my curling iron had to be, to work on the birds. And so, and I'll say, well, it took me hours, to curl all these feathers. But no, I mean, primarily preparing for the show outside of just coop training is fairly simple with a Frillback. They've either got the curl or they don't, and that's
Right,
that's
yeah.
kind of it.
With this breed, is there any specific health issues that are kind of associated with it, or are they pretty across the board?
They're pretty across the board. They do like to dwell on the ground quite a bit. So, I mean, they fly very well, but they do stay pretty low in the loft and on the floor quite a bit. So, you do have to take some extra precaution in making sure that your bedding is constantly clean. Or I do bare floors, so I'm pretty much am out there scraping floors, several times a week or at least every weekend. So it is a constant. Since they are floor dwellers, you do want to make sure that floor stay dry. And across the board, there are no real, nothing that is specific to a Frillback, I would say.
So you mentioned that they're pretty flighty. When it comes to parenting, when you go in the loft, are they all just bailing off of their nest? Do they do a pretty good job of rearing their young and sitting on the eggs?
They do. They're great parents and do raise pretty well once they kind of get established. That they are a little bit slow at getting started. I always tell, if you don't get eggs for a while, it's pretty normal. They kind of take a little time to adjust, settle into a new environment. Other than that, just being slow, they do take care of their young and raise and sit very well. So I don't use any foster parents for them at all.
So when you say they're a little slow to come into it, is it like if somebody just gave you the birds, they take a while to get used to the surroundings, or is it like they got to be a year old or
And I wouldn't say age wise, but I have found that they are just a little slow to get started, especially if you bring them into a new environment. And they're very frustrating to sex as well. You cannot always just tell by looking, at them, especially young birds, if they are, male or female. And we always joke that if you see one cooing, you better catch it and put a band on it because it may never do it again. So they're hard to sex in that matter, that they don't always perform like a lot of other breeds do. So sometimes they just kind of sit around and look at each other, and you think there's no way you're going to have any fur legs, but they do well on their own. I do tell people not to get discouraged if your first several months of owning them you don't get any babies.
would you say this is a suitable breed for beginners in the showing?
It's a great breed for beginners to learn how to show, because there are a lot of elements to the standards that you have to be familiar with, kind of look for. Is it the easiest breed to start with? Yes and no. I mean, it's got its pros. They have their pros and their cons for beginners. I do think if you stick with it and show enough, and that's the most important thing, is that you show and you take your birds to shows, so that way you can learn more about the breed. I think we all, especially with Frillbacks, become loft blind. When you just see your birds, you think they're all great, and that sort of thing. They're a fun bird to show, and it's a great group of people. We're not a huge group, and most of us are pretty spread out across the U.S. I think everybody should try them.
So speaking on the breed standard in shows, what are some of the common faults that you currently see when you're seeing this breed at the shows?
Obviously, you want a bird with a lot of frill, right? So that's the name of the breed, Frillback. In shows, primarily you're looking for a uniform curl throughout the wing shields. You want a nice large, I kind of like to compare the wing shield, if you're thinking about a hydrangea, like the flower, that big round shape flower, kind of want your wing shield to kind of be that shape. We want a nice round full wing. So that, of course, is the primary thing that we look for. A lot of faulting can be that you have curls that do not close. We call them fish hooks. They just look like a fish hook and don't curl all the way around. And the bar area is one of the hardest areas in the bird to get curl. And so a lot of times you'll see birds that have blank spaces with no curl through the bar. Another fault that is pretty common is that you'll see the shoulder of the bird, and you shouldn't see a bare shoulder. The frills should cover all the way up to where it is one wing. You shouldn't see any of the wing shields until you get to the flight feathers. The curl should be that dense. Other faulting is in color, of course. Like I said, we are very strict on color. You can crossbreed some of the colors, but it does take generations to get the color faults out. So, for example, if you breed a blue into your blacks to try to get a larger, stiffer curl, you're going to see some rusting in your blacks. You might even get a little red flecking sometimes, or rust colored flecking in the flights. And the same with blues. If you cross those to reds, a lot of times you're going to get mealies, or you'll get blues that start to get rusting, redding in the flights. White feathers on grizzles, if there are white feathers like in the neck area or the wing, those are a fault. A big fault too is in the flight feathers on the grizzle colors. They should be white. When you see a bird with the wings closed, you shouldn't see any grizzling or coloring in the flights. When you open them up, there can be flecking and some red or yellow in those flights, but when they are closed, they need to be white. And that is one thing that we're working on, several of us, is to try and, especially in the grizzles like the reds and yellows, is making sure that we have nice white flights and tail feathers. Over the years, some of those have kind of gotten a little darker, and we'll see a little coloration in the flight, more coloration than needed in the flights and in the tail. You should see a wave throughout the entire flight feathers and the tails. So pretty much every feather should have some sort of some sort of wave or curl other than like the neck.
Can you tell us about the point system?
So we no longer use the point system. We grade. We use the European method. You get like a G92, or we do the good, satisfactory, superior, excellent ratings. So we no longer follow that. We used to have the American standard that was divided by points, like the 100-point system. But several years ago, we went away from that and adopted the German standard, which is, European grading.
Do you think that's helped the breed overall?
I think so. For me, anyway, when I look at a standard, it's difficult for me to, when you've got a point system like, 100 points, and you're going to give 50 points to curl. For me, it's harder for me to determine how many points needs to come off of, of that particular section, versus if I'm looking at a bird and I rate it an S, like an S95. I'm going to compare that bird to all other S95s and then pick the best of those. For me, the point system is a lot harder than just the rating system.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way that we judge these birds obviously will make the breeders do their selective breeding differently in some ways.
Right. Absolutely.
I didn't know that they were judged that way. And the fact that a lot of other breeds that got the Grand National were being judged on a point system, even there. So you guys were judging it the European style then.
Yeah, every different breeds, of course, do it differently. So some breeds still use point system, but quite a few, like the Swallow Club and several Archangels, I believe, are the same way. We all kind of use that, the grading system versus points.
You're the president of the American Frillback Club.
Correct.
And you guys are all over the country. Can you tell us a little bit about that club?
Yeah, so it's been around for, actually not exactly sure the date it began. I believe it was a branch off of, at one point, and I could be wrong on this, I'm sure someone else knows more than I do, but it started out as there was a California Frillback club. I'm thinking that club was around before the AFC. And then Tom McKeag, who is kind of one of the big names in Frillbacks, he was kind of one of the premier breeders back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He, I believe, was one of the founders of the American Frillback Club. Tom is responsible. He created the white sides and recessive birds that are even bred in Europe still today. So Tom McKeag was kind of the founder of Frillback Club, from my understanding. We are a small club now, and we pretty much only have two major shows that we do. We do the Young Bird Show in Louisville, Kentucky every year, and then we also have a show at the Grand National every year. So those are our two primary shows for the club. We've been around. We do club bands. Try to do a quarterly. That's kind of the I think the thorn in everybody's side anymore with clubs. Is trying to do a quarterly and find people that will put something in the quarterly. So,
oh yeah.
I'm always looking for articles or for people to write stuff for me. So
if someone's interested in getting in touch with that club, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, they're welcome to reach out to me. I am on Facebook under Lance Newman or my email address is lancecnewman@gmail.com. You can also find my information in any of the NPA books and that sort of thing. So yeah, feel free to reach out and I can get you in touch with the secretary or the treasurer, Daryl Martin. We can get you signed up.
Excellent. And what about internationally? Are there any other countries that are really strong in the frillbacks?
Oh, yes. So internationally, Germany has always kind of been the leading country for Frillbacks, and that's where the majority of our bloodlines here in America come from. They have been imported from Germany. Recently, the Middle East has a huge population of Frillback breeders, and I've seen them really, really develop over the last several years. I think recently India just had their Grand National, and Tali Mezzanato, who is another one of my mentors and friends in the pigeon world, she went out to judge, and I got to see some of those photos, and their birds were very impressive from the photos that I've seen. So it is a breed that is growing internationally as well, and so yeah, there are a lot of great breeders in other parts of the world, and I hope to make it to the big Leipzig show sometime in the near future, so I can see theirs. That's always kind of been considered the premier Frillback show in the world.
How many frillbacks were entered at the Grand National in Oklahoma this year?
We had almost 90 birds in Oklahoma,
Oh,
which
that's
is pretty
good.
large. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty large for us. It was a great turnout and a great show.
And the one thing with frillbacks that kind of surprised me when I first saw them in person was the size. They're a lot bigger than I thought they would be.
Yes, they are. I will say that's one of the things that we have also going back to another question that you asked earlier. We have worked on the structure of the bird quite a bit. I remember when I first got back into them after being out for years when I was in school. When I started seeing them again, I thought, oh my gosh, these birds are huge. And I always refer to them, they look like a sailboat, like they're just long, and their flights are, we call them the floor sweepers. And so we have fortunately got away from that within, I would say, since I started working in the breed again, we have started trying to make them just a little bit shorter, not quite so long where they're sweeping the floor and look like that sailboat. That's what I call them. But to make them a little more of a structured breed, they don't need to sweep the floor, have that nice cobby look, and the standard calls for them to have a cobby appearance. So that is one thing that we have improved the last several years, is trying to get them from not quite being so long and big, more of a structure pigeon.
Well, it definitely is one of those pigeons, like I said, that stands out when people talk about, all the different breeds. Frillbacks are typically one that get pointed out right away because they are really, really unique and really beautiful too. I mean, they're
Right.
really nice to look at, and with the variety of colors and everything else, it's a pretty special bird for sure.
They're a beautiful bird and a lot of fun. So if anybody's interested, I try every year to hopefully get somebody new started and try to get them in the show world. So I'm always willing to help if I have the extra birds. Anybody can reach out if they're interested in the breed.
Lance, thanks for coming on and talking with us about the Frillbacks. Really appreciate it. And yeah, anybody who's interested in it, you can just reach out to the American Frillback Club and talk with Lance, and he'll get you set up.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks so much, Lance.
All right. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.